Hello and good evening. I'm Melissa Idris.
And I'm Sharad Kuttan.
You're watching Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then we consider what you know of the news of the day. Today, the Selangor government announced that it would not be pushing through with the controversial development of the Kuala Langat North Forest Reserve and would be taking steps to re-gazette the area, excised just 3 months ago. The state government also added that part of the degazetted area would be given to the Tepuan community, while another undisclosed part would be for the East Coast Rail Line. Now, this major reversal comes after months of public protests, accusations of insincerity in the public consultation process, and of using untruths in the justification for the degazettement. Damage done to the reputation of the state government aside, this evening's move seems to be lauded by detractors. What lessons can we draw from this controversy and perhaps use to strengthen environmental protection in the future, both at the state level and nationally? Dr. Teck Win Lim is our first guest on the show tonight. He's the Managing Director of Resource Stewardship Consultants, a scientific research and environmental consultancy with expertise in the spheres of forestry, wildlife, and climate legislation. Good evening, Teck Win. Thank you for being on the show tonight. Now, many consider this reversal a win for the people of Selangor, but I'm just wondering whether there is anything in the decision or perhaps in the ambiguity within the state government statement that might give you pause.
All right. Well, it's absolutely a victory for the people of Selangor. It's a victory for democracy generally. I have gone through the statement, and I would like I'll definitely welcome it, taking it at face value, and of course the government will have to follow through and actually get it re-gazetted before we can be totally comfortable. But it's definitely a time to celebrate. And if you don't mind, I've got a few names I'd really like to shout out in gratitude for the hard work that in actually leading up to this. Is that right?
Yes,
Yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So to start off with, Shak Koyok, who's Orang Asli, he took me to the site in March last year, and his uncle, who lives in Kampung Busuk Baru, Mamat Gang, he showed me around the forest, and there's this huge Meranti punai tree, and we got a tape measure, and we measured its girth, and it was 560 centimeters around the base. And so that's really quite special. And so Shak and the people of the villages around there have withstood so much pressure, and so they're really to be congratulated for standing up to the development pressure, the incentives, monetary incentives, and so on. And secondly, I was actually quite pleased that the Crown Prince, the Raja Muda Selangor Tunku Amir, he issued a statement just a few days ago saying his commitment to conservation generally and conservation of peat swamps as well. And I'm sure that actually made a difference as well. Real hard work as well in terms of the people's representatives in the Dewan Negeri. Particularly Najwan Halimi, whose motion was passed unanimously to support the forest, and also YB Elizabeth Wong and YB Rajiv Risha Karan, who all spoke up to try and save the forest. And
take a wonderful list of people, and absolutely right to thank them for their hard work, because as you rightly pointed out, this is a win for democracy in the sense that the responsiveness of the state to public pressure, to the concerns of experts like yourself and people like Faisal Parish, I think all went into the mix. But could you tell us a little bit about some of the structural defects in environmental protection that put us in this position in the first place? How did the state of Selangor get itself into the position and which is now reversing?
Yeah, well, the problem is that present law puts all of the power over forest reserves in the hands of a very small group of people, basically the Menteri Besar and to some extent the EXCO. So the pressure to convert forest reserves on these individuals, especially MB, is tremendous. And so it seems that in this case, they must have succumbed to the pressure initially. So that points to the systemic weakness. And fortunately, there's actually an easy solution to that, and that's to take the ultimate say over the future of forest reserves out of the hands of the EXCO and give it to the state assembly. So to give the Dewan the final say. So for example, if the EXCO wants to excise an area in future, they can put the proposal to the Dewan, and only if the Dewan approves, then can go ahead. And in order to turn that into law, it's only actually a minor amendment to the state forestry enactment that's required.
All right. Okay, that's a valid point. I'm just wondering, until we get that decentralization of power, deconcentration of power in the hands of the few, as you put it, what do you think we can do to ensure that this situation, this entire process doesn't happen again, perhaps in different states, in different scenarios?
Yeah, well, it's definitely not only going to happen again in different states and different scenarios, it's still happening in Selangor. There are forest reserves like the Bukit Lagang Forest Reserves, which is still under the cloud, under the threat of excision. And there's also a slightly different case in Bukit Cheraka Forest Reserve, also in Selangor, which is under the cloud of excision. So in order to stop this from happening again, like I said, they need to change the law and put the power back into the hands of the Dewan.
Teck Win, when we think about land and land use, is there something of a lack of creativity on the part of state governments, of developers in thinking about land use? Because if you remember, I think one of the reasons or justifications given for this development was housing, and one presumes it would be public housing rather than high-end housing for the 1%. Whatever the justification, I mean, housing will be a real need for any expanding population. How do governments deal with the fact that limited land resources to fulfill the needs of many segments of society?
Yeah, well, Malaysia has a very advanced town and country planning department, and many professionals who specialize in planning. And as a result of this professionalism, they've come up with countless plans. You've got the local plan, the district plan, the state plan. There's also the national structural plan. And so the plans are there. These are just ridiculous excuses given to justify additional development from, it looks to me just pure greed. Someone wants to make a fast buck, and they use housing shortage or future housing shortage as an excuse. I don't buy it, because we have the National Physical Plan, which has addressed all of these issues, which actually zoned places like Langat North as an environmentally sensitive area class 1, meaning for protection. Right. So I don't buy that argument at all.
Teck Win, thank you for being on the show tonight. That was Dr. Teck Win Lim of Resource Stewardship Consultants. We're going to take a quick break, but back with more in just a couple of minutes. Stay tuned. Hi, You're watching Consider This. I'm Melissa Idris. With me is Sharad Kuttan. Joining us now is lawyer Q Jiayao, who is the co-deputy chair of the Bar Council's Environment and Climate Change Committee. Jiayao, good evening. Thank you for being on the show tonight. I'm going to start our conversation with quite a big question, but let's narrow it down in the conversation. I'm wondering what weaknesses and loopholes in the process this entire controversy exposed to you.
Hi, Melissa. Hi, Sharad. Thanks for having me. Yes, let's start with that, isn't it? This is really a discussion about handling complexity in governance. And these are very complex matters. Developing decisions, what do you do with the very limited and finite resources, very precious heritage that we have? So multiple considerations, a lot of interest. Often they are conflicting. How do you balance them? How do you do your SWOT analysis, your cost-benefit analysis, and who do you involve and who decides? Now, these are all very important factors in how we make decisions in governance. And so rules around, especially what is highlighted in this case, the rules around public participation and rules around the access to information have proven to be present, but highly lacking.
Yeah, I could sort of on that. There were accusations of insincerity on part of the state government. The question of multiple petitions, or petitions signed by over 100,000 people, or meetings held but at a distance from the actual area with very little notice. How do we solve that when the state government can tick the box or boxes on public consultation, but not actually take heed of it ultimately in their decision-making process?
Yeah, sure. The fact that there are so many groups of variant shapes and sizes and colors shows that the matter is complex and that there are many aspects that seems to not have been considered or given adequate consideration in the process. Yeah, because when you look at the reasons that were put forward, it was at a very high level and there was very little detail involved, and it didn't help any discussion in terms of is this a right decision? Is this what's the process reasonable? So the myriad of input as well as the very disappointed and angry response when it was discovered recently that a decision had already been made. Unfortunately, you could say taking advantage of the pandemic situation to scuttle the due process of discussion, whether it's in the state legislative assembly or other processes. People are understandably very upset, especially, I must point out, when we are talking about the state of Selangor. Because if we go back almost a decade, now Selangor actually, even today, in terms of its safeguards and in terms of its legal framework for public participation in governance, is actually very progressive compared to the other states. Yeah, for instance, beside the state of Penang, Selangor is the only other state that has a freedom to information enactment that has a legal provision, legal enactment that allows for people to ask for information from the state government. And secondly, when it comes to the de-gazettement or excision of forest reserves within Selangor, there is a requirement that has been embedded into its own forestry law, the state forestry law, that the public consultation must be held, must be conducted before that decision can be made. So,
sorry, just if I may interject and ask you to elaborate a little bit on that, Jiayao, about this caveat that the Selangor state government must conduct public inquiries before any kind of de-gazettement or a reservation excision. How can we ensure that the public has that avenue for those concerns, as opposed to perhaps, on using, say, legal avenues, going to the courts through judicial reviews? What can we do to strengthen that process of public consultation so that the public feels they have a voice in how the state government is using or making environmental decisions?
Yes, the process of public consultation that is already written. So the what is written into the forestry laws that require public consultation? Well, it cannot and it should not descend into the minute detail of how the public consultation must be conducted, but it lays out some basic parameters. Yeah. So so that around it, there would be the expected rules of fairness, of reasonableness that has to be naturally imbued into it. So because if you were to write it down too explicitly, it becomes very rigid, it becomes very robotic, and it will not stand the test of time as well as variety as you make all sorts of different decisions. So there.
But Jaya, I mean, sorry, if I could interrupt, the accusation seems to be not so much that there wasn't public consultation, but that in fact it was kind of cosmetic, that it was done but without concern, without it really being taken into consideration.
The bill that was passed,
the bill that was passed, or by the State Assembly affirming commitment to the environment. We had, the EXCO member, Loy Sien, saying, well, none of this is binding on the EXCO. So if nothing is binding on the EXCO, then what real material effect do these progressive bits of legislation have?
You're right. The tick boxing is not enough. Yeah, just merely ticking off boxes, merely going through the motions. That should be called out and that should be criticized. And that actually, to me, if we were to roll back and zoom out, that's part of the process. And so what's happened is the framework that you have for public consultation is a bare scaffolding. And so members of the public, really, we have to make the most of that. It shouldn't be difficult, but right now, where it is nascent, yeah, because it's nascent. It has a lot of gaps in it, and we need to then say, hey, why are there restrictions in terms of who can attend and who cannot? This was a serious issue when they were conducting it. Why wasn't there enough prior notice that was given, especially to people who are concerned, location, and those kinds of restrictions? So the spirit of the law must also be respected and practiced. So the strange, curious thing here is, although, when in 2011, when the Freedom of Information and public participation, this law came around the same time, it was described with words like groundbreaking, pioneering, progressive, and people had such, were so happy and were so, had gained so much trust for the state. But there seemed to be this forgetfulness now in the KLNFR case of the wisdom behind those reforms, which is that the management of natural resources is best done with the participation of all concerned citizens. But yet there seemed today in 2021 almost a kind of allergy to public participation, a kind of discomfort to it. And even I see now as threats of defamation suits against those who criticize. I think this is a strange departure from that earlier spirit.
Jaya, thank you so much for sharing those insights with us. Appreciate your time. That was Q Jaya of the Bar Council's Environment and Climate Change Committee. We're going to take another quick break, but more in just a couple of minutes. We'll be back. Hello, thank you for staying with Shrad and I on Consider This. But if you've just joined us on the show, we're discussing tonight the Selangor State Government's decision to no longer seek to develop the Kuala Langat North Forest Reserve and to regazette the excised portion of the forest. Joining us on the show now is Mina Rahman. She's the president of Sahabat Alam Malaysia. Mina, good evening. I'm wondering what you think can be done for us to maximize this victory and ensure this does not happen again, both in the state of Selangor and in other states.
Yeah, I think, Melissa, it's quite an amazing announcement. It was really well received by all of us who have been working so hard to actually get this done. Now, how do we ensure that we preserve this? Of course, in the Selangor case, so far we have got the announcement, but what we would really like to see is the actual giving effect to the decision of the state. So in the real terms of gazetting the Kuala Langat forest and also in maintaining the other replacement forests and also in giving the lands to the Orang Asli. So all this we will have to watch and make sure that it is done in terms of real action. Now, what we can do in terms of other states and even Selangor, I think the real problem stems from the fact that much of this is driven by motivations of either real, financial issues or economic forces or lobbies which are behind the state. And the environmental, many of us in the environmental movement have been calling very much on the federal government actually to ensure that much more financing is provided to the states so that they don't have to resort to any destruction of any kind of the environmentally sensitive areas. I think I have said this in the previous show with you. It's called Payment for Environmental Services, recognizing the ecosystem services that all these very precious forests and oceans and seas and everywhere else, that hills and so on that play. So there's a lot of international money available also in the name of Climate Fund and Biodiversity Fund. So the federal government also has a responsibility to make sure that there are incentives for the states to actually protect these resources for the current and the future generations. If we leave it just to just the states, you will have these big developers and the big lobbies behind who come in and try to put all kinds of pressure. And states often, for all kinds of reasons, are under heavy pressure. So until and unless there is a change in federal-state relations, we are not going to see very much improvement. It will always be firefighting.
Mina, perhaps you could give us a bit more good news. We understand that in Penang, the Department of Environment has, sided with the fishing community that was fighting the Penang South Reclamation Project. Could you help us understand where that issue is going at this point in time?
Yeah, well, as you know, the Penang South Reclamation Project involves 4,500 acres of massive reclamation. And so we are up against the state government of Penang, and you have a big project developer behind it as well. So it was a big fight. It was actually a fight to challenge the EIA approval, the Environmental Impact Assessment approval. And we took it up to the appeal board under the Environmental Quality Act. For many people didn't know they could use this legal avenue. We worked with the fishermen as well as the NGOs and so on and expert professionals. We had to go to court because all other actions, protests, petitions, lobbies, letter writing to the state government, none of this worked. So we had no choice but to use the legal avenue, and we used the appeal board process under the Environmental Quality Act, and we succeeded on a legal point that the Department of Environment Director General had exceeded his powers when he approved the environmental impact assessment because the report was actually not in accordance with the state's then existing structure plan. So there was non-conformity of the structure plan, yeah.
Right. Mina, can I just ask you, you said that nothing worked with the Penang South Reclamation Project, not the public pressure or the coverage or the campaigns against it. But I'm just wondering if we were to compare that, say, with the Selangor decision to reverse the degazettement, what do you think was different in that case? I mean, what went into that decision, you reckon, of having the Selangor state government reverse their decision? Was it public pressure? Was it the political pressure that PKR put? What do you think went behind that?
I think it was a combination of factors, actually. I think the people's pressure, number one, cannot be underestimated in terms of the voice of the large numbers of hundreds of thousands of signatures that came in. I think it was also, what's important was who is ruling the state. It's the PKR government. And I think we are at a time when there is, we will go into elections in a year. I think the public is watching. Politicians are watching. So if you have a very strong government in the state, and they don't give a damn as to, what others say, and they think they have all the power in the world to do what they can. So in the case of Selangor, there was also the state assembly which stood with the people. And I think, and also to be fair, the PKR, I know Dato' Sri Anwar Ibrahim himself had intervened in the Selangor case, and I think that's why we succeeded with all a combination of factors. But in the case of Penang, unfortunately, we are facing a huge roadblock. The state is hell-bent on carrying this through. They have just refused to listen. And as you know, because this is the DAP government, I'm sorry I have to go public on this. Everybody knows this. There's been a big fight even in the, voices in the state assembly, but it doesn't get heard that much. And there's always a dissent about how this 4,500 reclamation project is going to save Penang and save the world. So they sell it as if it's, mother's milk, without which you will die. But many of us have actually exposed the fact that this is not true, that there are alternatives, and you do not have to sacrifice very precious environmental sensitive areas for meeting development needs, because you can do both, where you have the mainland. Penang is not short of land at all. So we are unfortunate that the Penang government is not listening. We've had a huge number of MPs, even Nurul Izzah Anwar, who had come out, even from PKR. We had a whole load of other, people coming in, MPs and former ministers, and all coming in support, but nothing is being heard. It's like we are banging on at a wall that just doesn't listen.
Well, Mina, we're going to keep a close eye on that story as it develops. But thank you so much for joining us on the show tonight. That was Mina Rahman of Sahabat Alam Malaysia, wrapping up this episode of Consider This. I'm Melissa Idris.
And I'm Sharad Kuttan, signing off for the evening.
Thank you so much for watching. Good night.